Picture this. It's a bright and sunny day outside. You're out in the ocean with your rich family and friends, sipping Mai Tais on your rich friend's yacht, when suddenly you feel something below the boat. And before you can react, giant tentacles rise and tower above the water and just collapse onto the ship. Everyone is screaming, there's mass hysteria, and the next thing you know is a cold and watery grave in Davy Jones's locker. You've just been devoured by the Kraken, a gigantic tentacled monstrosity lurking beneath the ocean waves, large enough to sink ships and drag sailors to their doom. Now, the first mention of the Kraken in historical record comes from the 1700s, a travel diary of an Italian Catholic priest. Over the coming years, word of this terrifying beast would spread, and in 1734, a missionary by the name of Hans Egeta described the Kraken at length. It remains the earliest detailed account which Hans heard from Norwegian seafarers. They tell you that a great ghastly sea monster now and then appears in the main sea, which they call Kraken. They say that its body reaches several miles in length, and it is most seen in calm. When it comes out of the water, it seems to cover the whole surface of the sea, having many heads and a number of claws, with which it seizes all that comes in its way, as fishing boats with men and all, fishes and animals, and lets nothing escape, all of which it draws down to the bottom of the sea. Moreover, they tell you that all sorts of fishes flock together upon it as upon a bank of sea, and that many fishing boats come thither to catch fish, not suspecting that they lie upon such a dreadful monster, which they at last understand by the entangling of their hooks and angles in its body. The text goes on to describe how the only way to escape this predicament is to shout the Kraken's name. Upon hearing the word Kraken, the beast calmly sinks into the sea. Egeta suspected that the Kraken was actually a different name for another type of sea monster, which can be found in even older written accounts as early as the 13th century. The Hafgufa was a Kraken-like beast said to be of similarly giant proportions. Now, it's easy to understand why sailors are a superstitious lot. I mean, think about it. When you are alone with your thoughts, surrounded by an empty expanse of water in all directions as far as the eye can see, your mind is sure to wander. You are bound to look for something to break the monotony, to ascribe meaning to even the slightest change. And for at least the last 100 years alone, many of us landlubbers have regarded tales of sea monsters as simple myths, mere legends and folklore, outright fictions, the product of overactive imaginations concocted by superstitious minds. But what if these legends are actually true? There are some writers that have regarded the Hafgufa as the largest creature in all the sea, capable of swallowing entire ships whole. Sometimes the Hafgufa's jaws would be mistaken for sounds, inlets, or bays, while its teeth would be mistaken for islands. I mean, if that's how big a Hafgufa is, I'd hate to see a full goof. Now, the Hafgufa would stay submerged for days on end, only to rise to the surface and wait for its prey. It would remain above the water until one of two criteria were met. Either it would find a meal, or the tides would change. In other accounts, the beast was said to use its own vomit as chum to draw in fish. Later in the 18th century, other authors would chronicle the Kraken, including the Norwegian bishop, a man by the name of Potopoden, which is often erroneously credited with first describing the beast. Now, all of them agreed the Kraken was immeasurably large and posed one of the most dangerous threats to sailors on the open ocean. Unfortunately, there are few actual Kraken sightings to report. One of the better ones comes from Henry Lee's 1883 book, Sea Monsters Unmasked. Now, according to Lee, a reverend from Norland swore that a Kraken surfaced in the late 1600s, and his claim is this: in the year 1680, a Kraken, perhaps a young and foolish one, came into the water that runs between the rocks and cliffs in the parish right around Alstaba, although the general custom of that creature is to keep always several leagues from land, and therefore, of course, they must die there. It happened that its extended long arms or antennae, which this creature seems to use like the snail in turning about, caught hold of some trees standing near the water, which might easily have been torn up by the roots. But beside this, as it was found afterwards, he entangled himself in some openings or clefts in the rock, and therein stuck so fast and hung so unfortunately that he could not work himself out, but perished and putrefied on the spot. The carcass, which was a long while decaying and filled a great part of that narrow channel, made it almost impassable by its intolerable stench. The Reverend claimed that, in spite of its fearsome reputation, the Kraken was not known to do significant amounts of harm, unless he admitted those whom it killed did not return to tell the tale. However, he did cite one account of an incident near Agarhus, Norway, that happened a few years prior. Now, according to a story, a pair of fishermen found themselves in a portion of the sea full of thick, goopy slime. And as the story goes, at a later time, that thick, goopy slime would be the inception of Sbarro pizza. Now, realizing that this slime is likely the presence of the Kraken, the fishermen tried to leave as quickly as they could, but it was too late. One of the Kraken's enormous horns skewered their boat, crushing it instantly. They only survived by clinging to the wreckage, after which they were presumably rescued. Now, these old stories about the Kraken are fascinating, but what about modern encounters? Has anyone reputable seen the beast in recent years? Well, actually, author Nick Redfern believes that the answer is no, and he wrote that, "Today, sightings and reports of the Kraken are not just rare, they are non-existent. This suggests one of two possibilities. Either the Kraken was purely a mythical beast, or it was hunted to extinction in centuries past. Whatever the truth of the matter, while the Kraken seemingly no longer endures, its legend most assuredly does." Now, in one sense, Redfern is absolutely right. Very few, if any, people today report attacks from the Kraken or the Hafgufa, but they do see similar creatures. And today, many regard tales of beasts like the Kraken as an attempt to explain sightings of giant squid. Now, this seems like a reasonable assumption. After all, in his book mentioned earlier, Henry Lee also notes that in 1861, the French ship known as the Electon recovered a piece of an unidentified animal. There was speculation that it might have come from a Kraken, but it was later determined to be a piece of a giant squid. Well, not nearly as massive as their legendary counterparts, giant squid are still enormous by anyone's measure. According to one account, a sailor by the name of A.G. Starkey was serving aboard a British Admiralty trawler off the coast of the Maldives during World War II, and one night he found himself alone on deck and noticed something odd off in the water. Starkey later said, "As I gazed, fascinated, a circle of green light glowed in my area of illumination. This green, unwinking orb I suddenly realized was an eye. The surface of the water undulated with some strange disturbance. Gradually, I realized that I was gazing at an almost point-blank range at a huge squid." Starkey said that he was able to walk the entire length of the ship, and the squid stretched from one end to the other, a colossal 175 feet long. I mean, just like the Kraken and Hafgufa, giant squid are sometimes reported attacking ships. Henry Lee mentioned the story of a Captain Jean Magnus Dens, who by all accounts was a very well-respected seaman. Jean claimed that while making a crossing from St. Helena to Cape Negro, his vessel was becalmed. Now, this is an important detail. As you might remember, the Kraken most often appeared in calm waters. At any rate, he sensed frustration building among his crew, and he needed to keep them busy. The captain gave his men orders to scrape and repaint the ship, and at one point, 3 crew members found themselves standing on planks suspended alongside the vessel. That was when an enormous squid broke the surface of the water, and with one arm, it grabbed 2 of the sailors and tried to drag them under. Their crewmates heard their frightened cries, rushed to their aid, and tried to pry them free, but it was too late. They were yanked away from the ship, far out of reach. Now, the third man did not fare much better. After another arm lashed around him, his shipmates were able to cut him free, slicing clean through the tentacle with knives and axes. However, he succumbed to his injuries and died in the next evening in a state of delirium. The beast was eventually driven away with harpoons, but took the 2 remaining sailors with it. Although rare, more recent encounters have also occurred. One of the most famous happened in 1941 in the aftermath of the sinking of the SS Britannia. After being sunk by a German merchant raider, crewman R.E.G. Cox and 11 other survivors found themselves adrift in an overcrowded lifeboat. When they were rescued only 5 days later on March 29th, Cox had a terrifying story to tell. Now, according to Cox, a gigantic tentacle popped out of the ocean one night, wrapped itself around one of the survivors, and disappeared beneath the waves. This beast was not satisfied, however, and soon returned, this time attacking Cox. He said this: "A tentacle quickly twisted around my leg and caused terrible pain. It removed itself almost immediately afterwards, but left me in agony. This pain, I think, was caused by the suckers in the tentacle, for later I noticed where it had gripped me, large ulcers had formed, and after I was rescued, I remembered the constant treatment which was given me for these ulcers, which seemed to eat right into the flesh and were red and raw. I still have the marks to this day." To add credibility to his story, Cox would often share the wounds he carried, which were clearly visible more than 2 years after his encounter. Researchers and friends alike marvel at these circular scars on his leg, each about the size of a quarter. While the Kraken and half-goofa might be legendary, their inspiration is all too real. I mean, thankfully, giant squids dwell far, far beneath the surface of the ocean, in depths humans rarely travel. They don't often surface, and even when they do, they aren't always aggressive, but the threat always lingers somewhere beneath the waves. Well, you go and find them. And more importantly, I want to know what you guys think, so be sure to let me know what you think down in the comments below. I would love to read them. And if you guys enjoyed today's episode, be sure to go ahead and smack that like and subscribe button for more content just like this. And just remember, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the very next episode.